Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari Yasodhanandana Raja Jana Ranjana Yasodhanandana Raja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari Yasodhanandana Raja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari Yasodhanandana Raja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Mr. Bhaka Mamsa Prajakta Stotara Satya Shri Srimad Bhagavatam HG Vasu Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Nantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya's Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Sri Caitanya Charitamrita Ki Oh glories to the symbol of devotees, oh glorious symbol of devotees, oh glories to the symbol of devotees, oh glories to Shri Guru Guru Ranga Guru Premananda. What text have we got on the board? 137. Okay. We spoke about that yesterday, didn't we? Yeah, that was yesterday's verse.
138 today.
138 today. Yeah, I thought Alanath Prabhu was speaking about that. Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Guru Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Guru Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Guru Bhakta Vrinda.
Oh, First and foremost, David Gaurahari Prabhu couldn't make it this morning because the bridge is lapping as we speak. So I'll just say a few words about the next few slokas and we'll just see how we go. It's rather sudden, so anyway. We don't have text 138 on the board, do we? So, Ishvara Puri Sishya Brahmachari Kashishvara.
Ishvara Puri Sishya.
Go on, yeah. You got on your phone.
Ishvara Puri Sishya Brahmachari Kashishvara.
Shri Govinda Nama Tanra Priya Anuchara.
Shri Govinda Nama Tanra Priya Anuchara.
Ishvara Puri Sishya Brahmachari Kashishvara.
Ishvara Puri Sishya Brahmachari Kashishvara.
Shri Govinda Nama Tanra Priya Anuchara.
Shri Govinda Nama Tanra Priya Anuchara.
Ishvara Puri Shishya Brahmachari Kashishvara.
Ishvara Puri Shishya Brahmachari Kashishvara.
Shri Govinda Nama Tanra Priya Anuchara.
Shri Govinda Nama Tanra Priya Anuchara.
Ishvara Puri Shishya, disciple of Ishvara Puri. Brahmachari Kashishvara, of the name Brahmachari Kashishvara. Shri Govinda, of the name Shri Govinda. Nama, name. Tanra, his. Priya, very dear. Anuchara, follower. Translation: Brahmachari Kashishvara was a disciple of Ishvara Puri, and Sri Govinda was another of his dear disciples. Purport: Govinda was the personal servant of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In the Guru Ganesh Dipika verse 137, it is stated the servants formerly named Bringara and Banguri in Vrindavan became Kashishvara and Govinda in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastime. Govinda always engaged in the service of the Lord, even at great risk. I'll keep going. The next few slokas are about Kashishvara, so he's featuring in this. Tanra Siddhi Kalidonne Tanra Agyapana Nilachala Prabhustane Milila Asiya. In the list of prominent devotees that Nilachala, what's another name for Nilachala? Haridas. Put you on the spot here. Jagannath-puri! Kashishvara was the 18th and Govinda was the 19th. They both came to see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at Jagannath-puri, being thus ordered by Ishvara Puri at the time of his passing away. Text 140. Both Kashishvara and Govinda were godbrothers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and thus the Lord duly honoured them as soon as they arrived. But because Ishvara Puri had ordered them to give Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personal service, the Lord accepted their service. Text 141. Govinda cared for the body of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whereas Kashishvara went in front of the Lord when he went to see Lord Jagannath in the temple. Text 142. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to the temple of Jagannath, Kashishvara, being very strong, cleared the crowds aside with his hands so that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu could pass untouched. So we'll leave it there. So next Saturday's text 143. Durgame parimendasya skalapate gatimuhu sakripayus tudanina shanta valanganam mamakinachimarandasya jananjana salakya chaksurmintam vinatasmai shri gurve namaha. So it's a bit sad that David Gaurahari Prabhu couldn't make it because he probably did a fair bit of research on Kashishvara Pandit. I know a little bit about it, so I'll share with you what I know. He's a very, very amazing devotee. Now, he was the disciple of Ishvara Puri. So, if we refer to the Caitanya Caritamrita, mainly Chaitanya Bhagavat, we have in Chaitanya Bhagavat there is a vivid description of how Ishvara Puri went to Navadvip to meet Nimai Pandit, and Nimai Pandit was in his later teens then. He was in a transition from being a jnani, a scholar who was very, very expert in grammar, which he had been for the first maybe 15 or 16 years of his life, and he was so good, of course, being the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He was undefeatable on the most momentous occasion, I guess, in his illustrious career as a Pandit, a grammatical Pandit, was when the Digvijay, who was famous all over India, Kashmiri Pandit, came to Navadvip, and all the other Pandits cleared out. They just took off, right? They didn't want to be caught in any debate because the stakes were pretty high in those days. It was like, it was like a great event. So even in this modern day civilization, we love great events, don't we? We like to go and see big crowds and big parades. Yeah, it's all to do with a bit of material, someone's prosperous, famous, or his prowess is great, or whatever, so they all go and see them. So people used to throng to debates. When a great Digvijay was coming, then they'd know there'd be action in town. And so then the pundits, the stakes were pretty high, so if they lost, then they would have to surrender everything to that Digvijay who won, and they would become their disciple. So that was not only was it humiliating, but they lose all the material possessions. So rather than risk that, they said, oh, Nimai's in town, he can handle this. 12-year-old boy, he's pretty good. So, of course, Nimai was aware that the Digvijay had come along, and it was very, very, because he was very proud. He was a student of, who was his deity? Can you tell me this, anyone? Saraswati, goddess of learning. So he had the special Shakti that Saraswati had imbibed him with the knowledge of, Shastra, and he was very expert, and he was very proud of it too, proud of his learning. So he arrived at Navadvip. It was a full moon, it was a beautiful night, so he decided to go for a walk along Ganges. He didn't have all his paraphernalia or his disciples and retinue and anybody with him. He was just there by himself, and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, or Nimai Pandit, was aware of this, so he was there by the bank of the Ganges, and they all came together. And he was very, very humble when he saw the Digvijay. He said, oh, Digvijay is such a great scholar there. Maybe you can recite a few verses about the Ganga for us. And Digvijay said, oh, Nimai Pandit, yes, I've heard of you. You're a very bright little scholar, aren't you? Sort of in that sort of voice, So he was very appreciative that my Pandit was so humble, and asked him to expound the glories of the Ganges. So immediately he started to rattle off these beautiful verses about the Ganga, and he went on and on and on, about 100 verses, just one after another, all different ones, and everybody was just completely astounded. Wow! And their minds were stupefied by the amount of learning that this, the extent of the learning of this great Pandit. So when he finished, Nimai said, that was very nice indeed, but you made a couple of grammatical errors. What? And then I forget, I'm just here, right? But on this particular verse, the 39th verse or something, you said the same word twice in a verse, and that means it's superfluous, And then in this other 64th verse, I mean, the Digvijay couldn't even remember the verses himself, he just rattled them off. And he was just astounded that Nimai Pandit remembered all the verses, and then he picked him to pieces on those verses. And he was shattered. And he went home that night and he was praying to Goddess Saraswati, how is this that I've just been defeated by this 12-year-old boy? And then Goddess Saraswati said to him that actually this boy is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so you do not have to feel any shame. So next morning he went and surrendered to Nimai Pandit and became his disciple, and he gave away all his fortune, his elephants, his great wealth that he was carrying with him, and he became a disciple. So around that time, a little bit shortly after Ishvara Puri, he came to visit Navadvip, and then when Ishvara Puri saw Nimai Pandit, Nimai recognised him as his spiritual master, and at that point in time, Ishvara Puri also brought his disciples with him, and then later on, when he left, Nimai Pandit followed him. Actually, his father passed away, Jagannath Mishra passed away, so on the, in the process of doing the Shraddha ceremony for his father, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, I'll go to Gaya and worship my father there, which is, what's another name for Gaya? Varanasi. Am I right? Well, this is where they worship the dead, right? So this is if anybody's been there, there's a lot of big guts by the fire there. And I've got a squirrel here, I won't, it's a sort of allegorical story I might tell at the end of the day about Varanasi. But anyway, he met Ishvara Puri and sought his initiation. Ishvara Puri was reluctant to initiate such a great sort of famous scholar, but he said, I know nothing, you're my spiritual master, and I'm just learning from you because I'm a fool. This is words from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Ishvara Puri initiated him. So then, later on, Ishvara Puri came back to Navadvip, and this is where the story begins, that he brought Kashishvara Pandit with him. Kashishvara was his disciple. So in other words, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was the godbrother of Kashishvara Pandit and Govinda. So they came, and at that point in time, Nimai Pandit having been initiated, he became very much overwhelmed by chanting the glories of the Lord, and he began to convince everybody else to chant. And there was this great story which I really want to speak about, because I've got a few facts about Kashishvara Pandit, but they're going to very quickly disappear within a few minutes. So I want to talk about this story because a couple of days ago someone mentioned this story. It was sort of like an incomplete what they did. I would like to fill this out. It's all to do with Shrita Vecha Kola. Shrita Kola Vecha. He was the person, the banana seller. You remember him? So anyway, we'll start with when Ishvara Puri was there. There was this great mass demonstration against the ruling leader, who was called the Nawab, right? Do you know his name? What is it? Huh? Who? Hussain Shah. Right, Nawab Hussain Shah. He got inspired by local Brahmanas. Now, there was a thing in Navadvip, of course, all those Brahmanas that sort of deserted Nimai Pandit after the defeat, they all came back and they were very happy about that. They continued on with their doing all their shrutis and the smritis and whatever sacrifices they performed, but they weren't doing bhakti, they were just following the processes of the Vedas according to the different injunctions. And when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu began to chant the holy names of the Lord vociferously, saying that you don't have to study all these shastras because chanting the holy name of the Lord is the goal of all these shastras. So anyone who utters the name Krishna has already studied all these shastras. So in other words, they felt like they were being sidelined, made irrelevant. So therefore they come, and it's still going on. It's been going on for 500 years, right? Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, and even Prabhupada was very, we could go on about that. So anyway, they went to the Shah, to the Nawab, and said, this guy's an upstart, this devotee's an upstart, he's causing public disturbances, we can't do our sacrifices, they're making so much noise, and they're not following the injunctions. Can you actually stop this, because it's not in your interest that he's actually fomenting a revolution, right? He's an upstart. So, of course, to keep the peace, the Nawab said, well, we'll have to put a stop to this. So what did he do? He put a stop to the Sankirtan movement, right? Broke the drums, right? They came in and they broke the drums. Makes for a great play, doesn't it? So then Lord Chaitanya heard about that the devotees being harassed by the soldiers, and he said, this is unacceptable. So then he led this mass kirtan throughout the streets, and it's said that like there's just so many people that were there in this kirtan, hundreds and thousands, and of course Ishvara Puri was there and Kashishvara Pandit, his disciples there, and they were there when Lord Chaitanya was leading the kirtan through the streets. I won't sort of talk about the end of it though, I'll just talk about a particular incident where he felt a little bit thirsty, so he was going through the back streets and he stopped at Kolavecha's house, right? So previous to that, we had the story that Kolavecha was this poor Brahmin, lived in this house, was leaking, and he really didn't attend much to his property, or whatever. He had some bananas, and whatever he had of his bananas he would use. So of course you have the bananas, you have the banana leaves, you have the inside of the banana, right? I don't know what they use that for. Oh, for a banana tree, inside the banana tree to make what? Curry, yeah. So everything about the bananas could be used, you know, so he utilised everything. And his favourite customer was Nimai Pandit, right, who would come. And he actually knew that Kolavecha in his last life was his great servant, in his last life was Krishna. And that he was a great devotee. He would be chanting Krishna's names all day and all night. He'd be wailing, chanting Krishna's names, and all the Islamics and all the pundits would say, this guy's crying. Why is he crying? Because he's so poor. He's chanting Krishna's names and Krishna's not giving anything. He's so poor that he just keeps wailing all night. Put a stop to him. So like that, he was oblivious. And then of course, he had no money, but then he just, whatever he had, as was said, he gave half to the puja for Ganga. So he was living on the borderline. So then Nimai Pandit would come and he'd look at his bananas and he said, oh, you're charging too much money for these, you know. And the pain of look on his face, and it was described that Nimai had these big, beautiful, big, long hands, and he'd try, well, give them back if you don't want to pay the price, and he'd hold him back and said, I'll take these, but I'll give you half the price. And it went on every day, you know, this banter went on every day. And he asked, why do you come here? He said, because I know that you're actually a very, very wealthy person. You're very rich, but you're hiding all your wealth. And one day I'm going to come to you and I'm going to expose to everybody how wealthy a person you really are, you know. Ultimately, well anyway, we come to here and then there's this big kirtan going on, right? And he comes to Srila Kolavecha's place with hundreds and thousands of people, and he goes inside, and Kolavecha used to have a well, and next to the well he had this rusty iron pot, right, which he would use for water to drink. So Caitanya Mahaprabhu, he immediately made for that iron pot, and he picked it up and he started drinking out of it, right? And Kolavecha was horrified. You're such a great soul, and you drink it out of this rusty iron pot. You're a Brahmana. You can't. I'm just this fallen soul. You can't do this, you know. And he's trying to take the pot off him, and he's keeping away drinking the pot. Then you can imagine the scene after Lord Chaitanya drank out of the pot. All the other Vaishnavas would also demand. They would go after that pot too. So, in other words, he established the greatness of Srila Veda College, Srila. Later on, in the Lila, he actually manifested his one of his forms as Krishna in front of Sridhar too. He's a very great devotee. That's in Srivas Thakur's house, I think. So, where are we? So, Kashishvara Pandit was there. So later on, when Nimai took sannyas and became Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in his travels, he kept coming across Kashishvara Pandit, that when he went on what he thought was going to Vrindavan, he'd come back and he greeted Advaita Acharya. Kashishvara was there, and so then he went to Jagannath Puri. And Kashishvara Pandit and Govinda Das, they were his godbrothers, and they served Ishvara Puri very nicely. But then shortly after that, Ishvara Puri, he became ill and he passed away. And his instructions were that you go to Jagannath Puri and you serve Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And so they took his instructions to heart. First of all, Govinda went there and he told Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that it was the desire of their spiritual master that he serve him. And it's a sort of very awkward position that a godbrother serves a godbrother in the disciplic line. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was in a bit of a dilemma. He didn't want a godbrother to serve him, but it was the instruction of his spiritual master, so he took that on board. And Govinda became his personal servant. There is that famous story in the Chaitanya Caritamrita where Govinda was massaging the Lord, and it was in the Gambhira room. Who's been to the Gambhira room in Jagannath Puri where Lord Chaitanya was? It's not very big, is it? Lord Chaitanya was 7 foot. It's only a small room. So Govinda was giving him a massage, but he was on the other side. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu dozed off. So Govinda just stayed there, continued massaging the Lord for a period of time while the Lord dozed off, and then he woke up and Govinda was still there. He said, "How come you're still here?" Because actually Govinda, while he was massaging him, he crossed over to massage the other side, but when he finished, he wouldn't cross back over to cross over the Lord. He said, "Well, I can't cross over you like that." And so it was a sign of his devotion. So that was marked in the Chaitanya Caritamrita. So Kashishvara Pandit, after his spiritual master expired, passed away, he went on a tour of South India and then eventually came to Jagannath Puri. And then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted him as his servant. And what was his service? Does everybody remember?
Sing, chant.
No, not anybody else read it before. What did Kashishvara Pandit do for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Bodyguard. Yep, okay. So that goes back to the previous life when he was Bringara in his past life, and he served Krishna, and he used to go to Yamuna, very, very strong in his last incarnation as Krishna's servant, and he'd bring pots of water from the Yamuna to Krishna's abode, so Krishna could bathe in the Yamuna in the morning. So he was very, very strong body. So therefore he became the bodyguard for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, amongst other things. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would go to Jagannath Puri temple to see Lord Jagannath, Kashishvara would go in front and keep all the crowd away from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then it said that when they had the Rath Yatra ceremony, you know how many people go to Rath Yatra? There's like hundreds of thousands. I don't know how many people there, but now it's about 6 million, isn't there? 5 or 6 million go to one Rath Yatra, one occasion. It's sort of a bit of a squash. So they're all squashed up. So they had 3 circles around Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was dancing ecstatically, and they wanted Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to express his full freedom in dancing, however he danced for the Lord. Sometimes he put his head on the cart, sometimes he'd be jumping in the air, sometimes be on the ground, exhibiting all the symptoms of ecstasy that was there in the ultimate bhav that one can feel for Lord Krishna. So he was exhibiting all those symptoms. So they wanted a clear space. So they had 3 circles of devotees protecting Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So in the first circle there was Nityananda and his associates. So that was the first circle, right? And it said that in the second circle, Kashishvara Pandit and Murari Gupta, they were in the second circle, so nobody gets through to the first circle. And then they had a third circle, which was King Patliparudra and all his soldiers and everybody like that. So in that way, the 3 circles protected Chaitanya Mahaprabhu while he danced ecstatically in front of the Rath Yatra cart. So this Leela was going on that Kashishvara was so happy in his service for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu got the news from Vrindavan. He'd sent he'd sent Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami to Vrindavan that time to excavate all the lost holy places. And while Rupa, Sanatan found his deity, which deity was that one? Madana Mohan, that beautiful story how he found Madana Mohan deity. And then Rupa was lamenting that everybody had a deity except him, and he knew there was Govinda deity. Govinda deity was one of the 5 deities that were carved 5,000 years ago by Vrajnava in the image of Krishna. After Krishna left, they feeling the separation from Krishna, but he'd being Parikit's grandson, he'd never seen Krishna, but his grandmother was still there, Uttara, so he asked Uttara what was the image of Krishna, and she gave the description, and they carved 4 deities, and each deity had a particular lila. So the Govinda deity was lost, it could not be found, and Rupa knew that was in Vrindavan somewhere. So this is a wonderful story about how Rupa was looking everywhere. And Rupa, he kept some money when he was in the service of the king, and when he got away from the king, escaped from the king to go to Vrindavan and take up his post of reviving all the lost places. He had some gold coins left, and he gave those gold coins to a farmer who kept 500 cows in the Vrindavan area, and when they milked the cows, he would give the milk to all the sadhus in the area, right? So therefore, in that way, Rupa maintained all the sadhus. And then the farmer came up to him one day. You all know the story, don't you? I'm just repeating. So the farmer came up to him one day and said, there's one particular cow that actually goes up to the top of this little knoll up this hill, and it just starts mooing, and the milk freely comes out of its udder and goes down this hole, right, up the top of the hill, and it happens every day and the ground is really wet. So Rupa immediately knew that that deity of Govinda was there, because there was, first of all, the knoll was called Gomukha, and so a goat, which is named for a cow, was pouring milk down that hole like that, and there was a second connection with the name. So immediately he began to excavate that hole, and he got all the villagers, and they were digging and digging, and they went down about 50 feet, 5 stories, right? But it was really soft ground, and there was a Govinda deity from 4,500 years ago. It was there, right? So Rupa had his deity. So very excitedly, he wrote to Lord Caitanya, and the letter was delivered. There's a long way between Vrindavan and Jagannath Puri. I don't know how long it would take a month or so for a letter to get there. But then Lord Caitanya received a letter that the Govinda deity had been found. So then he said to Kashishvara Pandit, well, I want you to go and look after the Govinda deity. And Kashishvara was heartbroken. He said, I can't leave you. You know, I'm just so attached. How can I leave this service that I'm doing? He had the ultimate service, being Lord Chaitanya's bodyguard. Why would you want to leave, you know, when you have a service like that? And then he saw the beautiful features of the Lord every day and was getting the mercy every day. And then the Lord's asked him to go to Vrindavan. He said, my heart will split into 2 if I leave you. So then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, out of his mercy, manifested a beautiful deity of himself. And it's called the Gaur Govinda deity. So it's a golden deity, and it's playing a flute, right? But it's a deity of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So then he gave it, and then one of these miracles that someone was talking about, Ramaswamy was talking about, that sometimes the deities accept the prasadam, right? So Kashishvara sort of started worshipping the deity, and then he noticed that the deity was eating all the prasadam that he offered, right? So then he became very attached and attracted to the deity. So he took the deity and he went to Vrindavan and he established the deity worship of Govinda in Vrindavan. And if you go there now, I think Govinda's in Rajasthan, isn't he, in Jaipur? Have you been to see the Govinda deity? You have? Did you know there's a little deity next to it? It's called the Gaur Govinda deity, just a tiny little deity. Yeah? So that's the deity that was installed by given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Kashishvara Pandit, and he maintained that worship. And then he had a couple of disciples, and then that worship's continued on in that line. Just about come to the end of all my extent of what I know. So has anybody got any questions, or would they like to add something on this about anything? No questions?
Do you know more names, Bringara, Bangara, what was their pastime previous?
Yeah, the Guru Ganadesh Dipika just states that he was no, you got me there. It's just that they used to get take big pots of Ganges of Yamuna water and bring it to Mother Yasoda so she could bathe Krishna. So that's all I know there. Okay. Anything else? Jai, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.